Start the meeting now.
We can start now. All right, so it's 7:30, so we'll call this meeting to order. It's the Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, City of Huntington Woods Historic District Commission. I think the first item of business is the approval of the May 1st, 2024 meeting minutes, but does anybody have any edits that need to happen to those minutes?
Motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
All right, there's my second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much. So the good thing is, well, I don't know if it's a good thing, but all we have is other business today, so I know that we've been trying to kick around some administrative approval changes. So Hank, do you want to kind of tee this up for us, and then we can have some discussion?
Yes, please. Basically, what we have here is that, we can consistently go through administrative approvals. And at this point in time, there's some things that we've learned over the course of this year because we've had meetings in the summertime where we didn't have a quorum. And some of the things that I'm looking at asking you folks to change, that should you favor with a positive response, would be some of the things that aren't so far of a stretch from what we already do. So if it's the pleasure of the chair, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through the items with the changes and then maybe have a discussion on those. And if you are okay with those at the end, I'd like to get a motion to approve the administrative approvals. If there's things you want to change, let's change them. And then let's go forward with this. And some of the reasons for it will be apparent. We can discuss them at the time. If there's things that you feel there are too broad sweeping and something that you wish to have seen at the commission meetings, you're certainly welcome to do so. What I've proffered is ideas based on discussions that I've had with some of the board, as well as with City Attorney Rosati, and as well as, other members of the past and present Historic District Commission. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through this and see where you're at this. At any point in time, if you feel that there's something that you want to discuss about a point, certainly feel free. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to start on the second one. Right now,
Do we want to go through, when do you want my comments?
after each one,
Okay, so let's start at number one.
you want to start with number one?
Because with the same materials, like size and style, do we need to add or back to original as substantiated? Because there could be a case where somebody replaced a half round with the K style and now people want to go back to it. And I'm just all about, I think you have a good eye for this, Hank, and whoever your replacement eventually will be, I would trust that the city could do that as well.
Right, and here's the thing with this too, is that we do have things like that, and it's like, and I'll get to this with the next one, but if it goes back to original and can be substantiated, in other words, if there's a plan, if there's a photo, if there's a document, if somebody remembers it and can describe it in detail to the point where staff would be comfortable that that actually did exist, then we certainly would have no objections. I certainly would favor that addendum to item one.
I'll probably be adding that a few places.
It's on here a few places.
But I think it could be added a few more, just
That's
because,
fine.
again, I feel like if that's what we need to do, to be that verbose, I'm fine. But I just think if, like I said, some of these houses are old.
Yes.
There could have been a modification to it, and people want to go back to the original. They shouldn't have to go through a lot of, if they can substantiate, more paperwork, in my opinion.
Well, paperwork and delays in time.
Correct.
So,
Thank you.
I've got a question to ask.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. That's right.
Let's say that they made a change to this house before the historic district was in effect, like with the gutters.
yep,
They put something in that was totally inappropriate, and it had not yet acquired historic significance. How would you feel about them replacing with the same sort of thing that was really not appropriate?
we wouldn't have, like, from a staff perspective, if I'm looking at it, my first thing would be to encourage them to go back to what was there. Sometimes what was there is cost prohibitive. If they're using like a standard K gutter and they had half moon copper round, half round copper there, and the cost is significantly different between the two. We would certainly want to explore going back to original, but at that point, since that's already been established, we would not be, we wouldn't tell them, no, you can't have gutters. Part of the problem with this is that some of the things we look at, like with roofs and things like that, part of the things is if the guy's got a hole in his roof, we can't have him wait 60 days to see you guys when he's got a leak in the roof. That's why roofs are on here and have been since the inception. Gutters, I would consider would be somewhat similar in that if you don't have gutters and you don't have proper control of your roof water, you risk foundation issues. If you have leaky basements, that type of things. So the answer to that is, Steve, is that I would take a look at what it was. If it was wholly inappropriate, I would try to encourage them in another fashion. But the bottom line is what they have there now, while it may not be completely shot, they could take the whole thing off and do that. We would be grateful for them doing that. But let's just say that they had a different pattern of downspout, like they had a regular gutter and wanted round downspouts with it, which you just don't do. I mean, we would encourage them not to do that, but we wouldn't say no on that. If it already existed. If it was deviating from that, let's just say that they went to put, let's just say that they originally had wood box gutters with copper lining, and they wanted to put vinyl gutters on there, that we wouldn't do. That I would have come back to the board. One of the things that we've done in this is that we always have like where the zoning, where there's zoning administrator approvals, and it didn't make it to the second sheet of this, but we always reserve the right to send something to the board. So if it was a case where it's just like wholly inappropriate, or the guy wanted to put wall side windows in a arts and crafts bungalow, what we might do for that is we would say, I'm going to tell you no. If you want those and you feel it's necessary, that's what you want to do, I would send you to the Historic District Commission, because that's nothing that can be resolved at my level. At that point, I would need a board decision.
See, what I'm concerned about is they have wall side windows in there already, and they're
Yep.
put in prior to the establishment
Yep.
of the Historic District Commission, and they want to just ante up them again because they went bad after, 10, 12, 15 years. They say, I'm just replacing with exactly what's there now, and we are just perpetuating a situation that we probably would not
And that would
do in
be,
front of the commission.
and that would be right. You would be right. But the thing with that is that you can't force them to go back to the regular materials. Once it's been established that there's another window or another material in there, you can encourage, you can point out the benefits of the historic tax credits, which are in play right now, but you can't tell them you
Retroactively
have to.
punitive, right?
Pardon me?
You can't be retroactively punitive.
That is
It's not the way
exactly
the
correct.
ordinances and codes
It wasn't,
are designed to
it
work.
wasn't designed for that.
And it's just the way it is. Just like I can't say your house isn't code compliant today, you have to do all this stuff. I can't be punitive when you go about it. So that's the one that, it's interesting, but I don't know how to solve that, right?
Okay,
I-
well, you've answered the question, and
Yeah.
I think that my concern wouldn't be able to be addressed either way in
I
front
don't
of
know,
the commission
right? I don't
or
know.
with an administrative.
Right. Now, having said that, your concerns are really valid, because if there's a way to get them to go back and put those in there, perhaps the HTCs would be something that would come into play. But again, those don't kick in until you reach a certain dollar level. So there's a percentage of your SEV that you have to, in order to make those work. So I would say to you that while we would greatly encourage those, I think the way that Chris put it as retroactively punitive is exactly what we can't do. So, what is our pleasure on one?
I'm going to beat this horse a little bit more, I'm sorry. So, as we know, all the houses in the historic district aren't necessarily old and historic. We've got 70s houses in there, right? We could have...
A few.
So, if I've got a 70s house with cheap K-style gutters, and I want to spruce it up and put copper gutters on, this language doesn't allow me to do that. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
The language would let you improve improve the style. So in other words, if you wanted to go from, let's just say you had vinyl windows and you wanted to go to vinyl clad wood windows, your rails and styles and your components of the windows, your mutton bar sizes would change, and that would be more consistent with what was historically there. Changing a house that wasn't historic, it would have been a non-contributing resource to begin with. So if you're looking at a 70s house, a 70s house might be reaching its 50 years, and that might make you take another look at it as to whether or not it's a contributing resource. In the original Historic District report, the final report, you had houses that were not contributing resources that today might be considered contributing resources because that was formed in 2004. And while it may not have reached its resource, it may not have reached its age of minimum of 50, it would have now, because there's, you have 20 more years to tack on. Conversely, you have a non-contributing resource, it may still well be non-contributing, because there were reasons that it wasn't contributing. It was a style of architecture, it was somewhat bastardized in architecture, it was, for a number of reasons. It was altered, there was an addition put on it that would not comply with historic. But part of that, if you take a look at like a lot of historic districts and a lot of areas that were built up and built onto, and Chris can probably chime in on this, but you have a lot of buildings like on the University of Michigan campus and other areas that have been redone, added on to, where additions were put onto significant buildings designed by significant people, and they don't look anything alike, so they don't match. They specifically don't match. They're designed to be different in their way that they look, and that helps it helps differentiate the old from the new. So, and they do that on buildings, they do that on houses. We try to encourage that on houses and depending on the additions. So to distill down your answer to that, if the house was a historic resource, it is a historic resource. If the house wasn't a historic resource, it could possibly have attained historic resource. If a house was not a historic resource and did not do anything to make it a historic resource, the age alone doesn't make it a historic resource.
But you've confused me now. So the question was, if I have a 70s house with a K-style gutter, and I don't know, was it a contributing?
And it was a non-contributing resource, I would let that
Was
go.
it a?
So I guess you've lost me there.
Okay.
So if a house is in the historic district,
Yeah.
it is a non-contributing resource. It's the first time I've heard those words.
Okay.
Does that mean they still have to follow historic guidelines?
Yes, but they're viewed a little bit differently, to the extent that they don't have to have, okay.
There may be, let me just interrupt for a
Yeah.
second, because there may be a moment of confusion here. The historic district is not contiguous. So there are houses on streets that are in the historic district, and then there can be houses next door that are not in the historic district, but they're right next door. So the contributing resource is those properties that were identified as part of the historic district, but it's not necessarily contiguous.
Okay, let me
So
help you with
that could be, so if you're talking about a house on a street that's next to a house that's contributing resource, right? But it's not, it is not, they can do whatever.
Yeah,
So
So we're only
it's
talking about
not-
the houses.
So for the sake of argument, let's say it's a
That's not,
Exactly
right.
historic home,
yes,
and it's got regular OK style gutters on it,
yes,
and I want to put fancy copper gutters on it.
we would let you.
Okay.
But I just want to be clear, the historic district has 108 homes in it. The historic district is designed and it's encompassing in its boundaries. If you are within the boundaries, you are in the historic district, whether you are a contributing resource or not.
But there are houses on my street that are not contributing resources.
But that doesn't mean they're not in
Still
the
in the
historic
district.
district. You're still-
Well, I know there's still,
They're still
okay,
in the
well,
district.
right.
They
yeah.
get, they get a different, a little bit
We just
different
haven't
set.
gerrymandered.
No.
Pretty much,
You
yeah.
view them differently because they have the architectural and design elements that typically a historic house would have, they don't. And for whatever reason at that point in time, be it that they weren't aged out for 50 years to be qualified even for historic, or whether the architecture was nothing special. There's a couple of them on York, I'm gonna use for an example,
Exactly.
that wouldn't be considered historic houses or wouldn't have that. There's a few bungalows.
So, but they're classified as non-contributing.
They're called non-contributing resources,
That's-
but they are
yeah.
within the historic district.
So they follow looser rules.
They follow, right, they follow looser rules because the same things that apply, the features that apply to most contributing resources, they don't have.
So do these administrative approvals, once they go into effect, is this historic district specific, or would this apply to anybody in the city?
Historic district specific.
So there's another set of administrative approvals for everybody else?
No. There's,
You can
there's,
basically do what you want,
it's,
as long as
it's,
doesn't need a permit.
right.
But
if-
yeah, as long as it, but that,
Permit
they can go
or-
before the zoning commission for other stuff.
Or
Right.
site plan approval.
Right.
Got it.
So if it
Okay.
needs a site plan approval, like you're putting additions on the house, most of those go to, except for if they have a few different reasons,
Yeah.
which you would liken to administrative approvals, it wouldn't have to go to the planning commission.
Okay.
If it doesn't meet those, then it has to go to the planning commission. With these,
Makes
if
sense.
it meets these, it's gonna get taken care of right out here. If it doesn't meet these, or there's a question as to whether or not that's on the fence and that's really not quite there, the zoning administrator or planning staff would then be able to send that to the Historic District Commission if they're not comfortable that that meets the level of what you're looking for.
Got it. Okay, thanks. One.
Sorry, I opened my mouth.
No, listen, you know what, we were gonna have this discussion on one of them, if not that one, so you might as well have it first.
So there's nothing, and just one more thing, this will just be a generality as we go through this. We talk about appropriateness, right?
Yes.
A lot of our modifications. If there's any of these that you think that you could handle the appropriateness topic,
Yep.
I'm all game for that too. But
Okay.
that's gonna be a slippery slope. That gives you more administrative approvals, but I think there are certain things that we get in here and we all just sit here and go, oh, we made somebody do this, right?
Right,
And so that could be another term that's added to some of these. I'll just leave that out to everybody.
absolutely,
And I'm okay with that, but I'm not gonna speak for everybody.
right. So let's take a look at number 2 then, because right now, open metal fences such as chain link and wrought iron, aluminum, in typical wrought iron style and patterns, I wanted to add privacy fences to that comply with chapter 40-10.10 of the city code. So here's why I wanted to do that, and here's why I'm asking you for that. One is, privacy fences that meet the code. Theoretically, the purpose of having the privacy fences come before the HDC was so that you protected all views and vistas. The only views and vistas that are protected are your neighbors. So if you have a privacy fence, you're still governed by a chapter, 40-10.10, which says how you can have a privacy fence. We would do that administratively. The reason for that is that for this summer in particular kind of taught us a lesson in that we had a lady that came before us for a privacy fence. We couldn't put together a quorum, had to postpone her for the next month. Couldn't get a quorum, so she waited 60 days for a fence. After 60 days, according to Public Act 169, you're automatically can be approved. And that's what we finally did with her. But it cost her 60 days, 2 meetings, and for a privacy fence. So that's the impetus for me wanting to put that in there, because if it fits, great. It wouldn't go any further forward than the rear corner of the house, which they don't do now. And it wouldn't have to be, it's one of those that it would have to be taken a look at and see, but I would apply the same criteria to that as we apply anywhere else in the city. And then that way, and again, privacy fences are one of the things, if you take a look at the standards for which you use for approval, if removed, would go back to its original condition. And that's the case with privacy fences. If they come out, and nothing is impaired. So that was the reason for putting that there. So if you have any discussion, thoughts, or question on that, feel free.
Let's go back to number 1 for a second, because we didn't finish with that in the sense that Chris offered an amendment to it And I think we should nail that down before we continue to number 2. So the amendment was,
Well, this just takes into account, so we talk about appropriateness, and maybe we can give Hank, so I'll give an example that you said that triggered that for me.
Right,
You had a house, and it didn't have gutters,
right.
and it's in the historic district, and because of lots of issues, we all know that gutters are probably a good thing because of foundation issues, types of soils that we have in the neighborhood, and they want to come in and put a gutter on. If you deemed it appropriate, I would be happy with that administrative approval, right? Even though it's a historic home,
Yes,
versus, because we mentioned that that's a very rare case. But, so those are the kinds of things sometimes that we're gonna make that person come to put a gutter on their house. Are we really gonna be able to substantiate a gutter if there was never one? No. But we would be using the appropriateness kind of a rule.
well, how would you word that?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm trying to, he mentioned a case
Well-
that caused that trigger.
we would come back to, where it says, or back to original if substantiated, and we would just add, or deemed appropriate. Now, here's what I would consider appropriate with it. So if you look at the big picture, you have a historic property. The historic property is having a foundation issue. Why is it having a foundation issue? Because there's no control of the roof and surface water. If they had a gutter to it, the bigger picture is we're now protecting the resource. If it doesn't have a gutter and you say you can't have a gutter and you have to just live with this, then we're creating a sense of liability because we're now saying you can't protect your home and your foundation from water like everybody else can in the city. So I think that's, Chris, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that was kind of where you were going with that.
Yeah, but I also, when I look at gutters, I mean, I'm probably more on a different spectrum here, so
Right.
I have a Tudor house, I would love to have half-round gutters,
Yeah,
and if I just came to you and said, can I have half-round gutters, you would tell me, no, you have to go in front of it. It's a gutter, right?
yes,
So I could apply this in a much broader spectrum personally, because I think a half-round is appropriate for a Tudor, I just don't happen to have it. And it may have actually been a K gutter, K-style gutter's been around a long time.
yes.
But, so I just, for me, if we're gonna do administrative things, that we feel like the staff are sensitive and can make some of these judgments and are less punitive to people so that they maintain and get things done, I'm for that.
Then why don't, if it's the pleasure of the commission, why don't we include,
But that's just me.
why don't we take
Sure,
out
everybody else talks.
the,
I agree with that.
so why don't we take this out and word it this way? With the same materials and like or appropriate size and style.
The wording, who's my attorneys? Come on.
I guess my concern is, if you just say appropriate, and I like the way you're adding that,
Yeah,
defining that, because you could put the gutter on, make it look like a Chutes and Ladders game. That meets appropriateness, but it wouldn't meet the HDC or any kind of guidelines, right? So how do we that's the only protection on it.
the only
That
other
makes sense.
protection that you have is on the last sentence, which we had on here that we would just make sure stays with it. It isn't on this copy, would be that at any point in time that the zoning administrator or city staff feels that the request is inappropriate and are not willing to grant it, but the appeal would be to the Historic District Commission. So just because I say no, which I would always err on the side of just saying no, would be that there's an appeal.
There's a vehicle,
that
there's a
it comes
process.
to there. So there's a vehicle for where it's no longer one person or myself and Franco. I now have 7 people that can speak to this and give an opinion and guidance.
Although, I mean, you could take a shortcut, which is to answer your questions, instead of saying appropriate, say historically appropriate.
Okay?
Okay?
Yeah, you can do that.
Just use the edge.
That's actually pretty good.
Let's just use the, yeah, just say historically appropriate and leave it at that.
So Kink, you could conceivably allow a K-style be replaced with the half-round administratively. I guess that's kind of what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
If everybody else is too,
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to achieve.
yeah. I think
Okay.
that's right.
Yeah, I was struggling with the word appropriate, but I think historically appropriate.
That
Put some
kind of nails it down a little bit.
bars
Yeah.
around it,
Okay,
yeah.
so
And
you're
now-
probably gonna redraft these and send them out.
I'm gonna
for
redraft
edits,
these and then I'm gonna bring it
we'll
back
probably
to you
do a
guys
formal
next
approval
month,
at some
and you're
other-
gonna have a
Yeah.
formal
If that's
approval.
okay with everybody?
Yeah, okay, so back to number 2 on fences.
Okay?
There's one grammatical thing I would do, which is I would put the word "and" before privacy. So that it's clear that it's part of a sequence.
We can do that.
And then then I have another question, which is, and this may be more of a zoning thing than a historic district thing, but it's my understanding that in Huntington Woods, you can have privacy fences on side yards and backyards, but you can't do them in front yards. Is that correct?
You can't do them in side yards either, rear corner of the house is for privacy.
Okay. So are we taking that as a given that, that's what you mean when you say that comply with the city?
Chapter 40-10.
Okay, I'm good.
That's where that's listed.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure about that.
Fair enough. So was
Privacy
everybody?
fences doesn't imply any materiality, that's covered in the code, right?
Yes,
Because privacy, I know, is less than 50% open, which means you have to get approval from your neighbors, et cetera.
right, and that's going away. Neighbor approval is going away, so it's going to be administrative anyway for, depending on the pleasure of the commission at the next meeting. So
Hmm.
we will see that. So, all right, so I'm going to move to 3 then. 3 stays the same, driveway and walkway replacement, providing that routing and materials are not changing. Unless you want to say that, well, actual walkways, like sidewalks from the driveway to the front porch, or connecting the service walk to a driveway with a walk. We've had a couple of those. Unless you feel that that's a change that you would like to make.
I'm kind of at the same place I was with the gutters. If I've got a room finished concrete and I want to replace it with pavers or exposed aggregate, I want to be able to do that.
Well, I actually had the opposite, because
Right.
the applicant who was doing the privacy fence had crummy old pavers and wanted to go back to what was probably substantiated as original concrete.
Right.
And so I was gonna add back to original substantiated, and then the other materials, I'm all for what you're saying, but I've seen tons of driveways, little walk connectors, and I've seen people come unglued over it. I don't necessarily understand it, because it's horizontal, it doesn't obstruct, but I've seen it in this commission, so if there's other flexibility to be added to this one, I'm all in.
Could we slap the same historically appropriate language on
You can
there?
use that all the way down every single one of these if you want.
I'm wondering if that isn't, I mean, I don't see
The
any
issue
reason-
becomes that, so here's the issue, when you go back to the age of the houses, the older the houses that there was a driveway. Typically, it led to a 1-car garage because people wouldn't have the money to have 2 cars at that stage of the game when they first came out. Typically, the car would go back to the garage. They would come in through the side or back door, and they typically wouldn't come in through the front door. So that's one of the reasons that you never saw these connecting walkways. But if you take a look, a lot of them in this area and through here all have walkways that come from the driveway to the front door. The issue with that becomes, it's below grade.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's horizontal. It's not bothering anybody. Come on.
But
So-
I've seen this, so this is, I mean, I'm not gonna wrap myself out, but I had a 2-track at one point in time, I got approvals on it.
Yes, you
I filled it
did.
in to make it look like a 2-track still with exposed aggregate, but, so filling in 2 tracks, you know, how do we replace, I mean, I think exposed aggregate is a much more expensive and elegant look, but other people have disagreed, so people talk about it and see if there's something here, but I've seen it go lots of different ways, I've seen it over the last couple of years, right?
Yes. And we've seen it, and actually the solution that you had is one that I've referenced before because you made the 2-track out of exposed aggregate.
Opposite.
You made the 2-track out of concrete and the rest out of exposed aggregate so that the old pattern was differentiated from the new. And it worked, I think it worked really nicely, but having said that, that's an expensive driveway.
It was, but I thought it was worth
It-
it. So, but if it gotten here, it would have, depending upon the flavor of the committee, I would have been eviscerated. Because I was proposing something different.
No, just impeach.
Impeach, well, I would have been on there.
Okay, so what are the thoughts with that one?
How do, again, do we need, I mean, if we want to propose something, we can do it here, or we can kind of work on it for next.
I can take your comments back and I can generate something based on what the general flavor of each discussion is. I mean, I'm taking notes, so. and have a wall.
Well, I mean, that would be an easy one to amend. You could just put at the very end of the wording that you have now,
Right,
and / or historically appropriate. That gives you a little bit of flexibility.
yeah, the only problem with that is that the walkways from the driveway to the front door are not gonna be historically appropriate,
Well, that's a judgment call for you.
so.
You
Okay.
It could be a separate one. The addition of a connecting walk from driveway to front door can be administratively approved. That could be a whole separate line item.
How about
right?
things at grade or below
And,
grade?
and it could be differentiated in material if you wanted to do that too.
Well, I mean, so the only reason I'm saying that, so if people don't like brick pavers and other people do, I mean, there's a lot of variety. Again,
Right.
I don't think it's offensive because it's horizontal. I don't think it obstructs the house. I've gone by some of the ones that we argued about, and I was kind of surprised that we could even have the gall to argue about it because you're looking at it. I mean, when you look at experience, you
don't
don't
see
see
it.
You
it.
can't see it.
So,
All right, so why don't I come up with some verbiage for that one? When I bring it back, it'll have some differentiation.
Okay.
it's great.
Okay, 4, replacement of uncovered porches with the same or like materials and of the same size or style. So,
To me, it's exactly the same,
it's kind of the same thing.
right?
It is, and then, again, we saw a porch, it was right at where Dundee goes into Hendry.
Right.
Where they expanded the porch.
Right.
It's less than height of my knee.
Right.
They have 2 chairs on there, I walk by it every day, it's fabulous, I keep meaning to take a picture and say, I can't believe we argued over this poor person, because it was so small.
Right.
That when you open the screen door, you fell off the porch, and it looks fabulous now, so that's another one of those ones, I don't know where to draw the line.
But you're describing an expansion.
That
It
may
is
not be
expansion, but it
historically
was-
appropriate, but it's practically appropriate.
It was also,
Well, that's, wait till we get to the garage.
Convenient.
Would that porch even, that small even be allowed by code
it wouldn't, but
at
that's.
this point in time?
And that's where, so you guys gotta rein me in about, so that this committee is doing something, but I'm all for some of these that I've seen us argue over the years that I feel somewhat embarrassed sometimes up here having to
I
argue.
remember
against
that,
it.
that house too, the porch.
And it's honestly, the people have 2 chairs out there, their kids play out in the street and they sit out there.
It's
exactly what.
not overkill. It's just not.
So we just have to figure out, again, that's another one. I'm
Right.
encouraging, if anybody wants to add something different, I'm all for it. I just don't know how to word it so that there's some confines. If it's a 30%, is it a percentage increase?
You want to add to this to give people.
I
leeway
could,
to-
I would, but I'm only one person.
I think it's kind of hard to do though, because
I agree.
the example that you're talking about is a very modest adjustment,
That's
you
why-
know? And if you take away any, then somebody can come in and decide that they want to,
See,
Okay, so same size.
I think I would just leave it the way it
Okay.
is.
you're safer with that because you can say, take a figure, you can take 20%, and 20% I can screw it up pretty good.
Yeah, you're right, okay.
So-
You could put a square footage on it, but if you
Yeah.
just go to this, I have the same problem, right? If I need to replace my porch and I'm not changing the size and I want to go from concrete to aggregate or slate or something, I should be able to without having to come before us.
But it does trigger you coming before us, so I don't know
Not
how
if
to
we-
solve that
It-
one.
Well, I think we say the
it-
same thing,
it-
historically or.
It
historically.
triggers it unless you change this.
Right.
Because I remember somebody wanted to do bluestone on the front porch.
Yes.
I mean, it was beautiful, and that was argued.
It was, right.
He didn't do that.
I think we ended up making him
Went
take
back
it
to
out because out
concrete.
of frustration.
They're talking about the house on
That's what-
Hendry?
I don't know, I've been on this for too long, I say, because I can't remember them
I
all.
think it's next to Jules's
Okay.
house.
So
He wanted to put some sort of different material.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right, that was the
He
one.
was
That
denied.
Nice,
Yeah,
Sterling Heights marble.
So couldn't we just use the same or historically appropriate material there?
you could.
Give-
You know what I'll do? I will go ahead and I will make an addition to that.
I've got a question, Hank.
Yeah.
Is there a porch that would not meet current building code?
There's several of them.
Okay, should there be verbiage in here that allows them, the minimum change to meet current code? And that-
Okay, so here's where I'm gonna throw you a curve. The building official has the right to waive certain codes as long as they're not safety related in historic properties. So the building official can say, okay, well, your railing is not of the right height, but it's existing in its code, I'm not gonna make you put it up there.
But if somebody wanted to put one up that met code, how could we realistically deny that?
You're not going to.
So if
Or
somebody wants to
administratively.
make a change that would bring something up to the current code, I think that you should be allowed to administratively approve that if it's a similar style and material.
Yeah.
Why should they have to pay $300 to come before this commission to build a bigger porch only because they want to meet the current code?
Well, as long as the materials were consistent with what was there and architecturally appropriate and historically appropriate, there really wouldn't be a reason.
Do I have to do that if I want to put like a railing on it just because I'm aging in place? I have to come before the commission, don't I?
You do now, because that would alter
It's
the
another
visual
one that,
impact.
honestly, I'm
That would alter the visual
probably
impact.
selfishly need to do that for my parents and stuff, but to
You
let them
just-
get into my house.
No, but that's fine, that's a valid point.
Architecturally and/or historically appropriate seems to even be more fitting. And
For
again, you could tag that on.
For something like that, yes. A lot of times the porches have, like, there's a lot of Tudor Revival style structures in the city that have the porches and have rails on them, and they would be a wrought iron or something like that that would have been period appropriate or whatever. Putting on like the white PVC Menards panel fences would not.
Yeah, and that falls under.
That
they're
falls-
Neither historically or architecturally appropriate.
Exactly. So we would say no to one and yes to
Yeah.
another.
That makes sense to me. That covers the gutters, that covers the sidewalk, that covers the porch.
Okay, so
So what was that,
I have some
architecturally,
direction as to where I'm gonna go with
Yeah,
this.
somebody needs to release that, but-
The re-roofing, I think, is fine.
And the painting, masonry's fine, right? We don't have to do
Yep,
anything with that
I don't
one.
think we have to do anything with that. Shutters when matching existing and sign designs, configuration material, or historically accurate. The reason that I want to put the or historically accurate in there is because 90% of the gutters that you see in here are incorrect. Or gutters, not shutters rather, are incorrect. And a shutter theoretically should be half the width of the window. So what you're seeing now is when you go to Home Depot, you're seeing all these 12-inch shutters, which don't fit anything. So it's just like a little bit of dressing on that. So proportionally, historically, and architecturally, those would be incorrect. Yet they found our way into the architecture, and I'll refer to the architects here, but the windows should, the shutter should be half the width of the window. So to me, if they're asking to change those and want to go back to the original, I would be all in favor of something like that.
They also should be functional.
Well, but they never are. I mean,
I know.
they're screwed onto the brick.
That's a personal beef of mine.
Understood. Kind of defeats the whole purpose,
Right.
but yeah. Is everybody okay with adding that to that? Okay, so I'll add that. Okay, window and storm replacement was done with the same pattern, size, material, clad wood is acceptable in place of wood and scale. That's what we have now. Does anybody have anything that they want to do differently with that?
So if I went from steel to aluminum, same everything else, but just a different material, that would trigger them having to come in, right?
That's probably the single biggest problem that you could have with the historic houses, because a lot of the historic houses, the Tudor revivals and that, have the steel windows. They have where
No, I
you,
meant just, this is just storms, right?
well,
Some of the
storms,
storms are
if you, okay,
steel
so
on
take
steel
storms first,
windows,
steel
right?
on steel. Yeah, I mean, it would be, if you wanted to differentiate, you wanted to put that on there for something different, you could, but
Just
really,
asking if you ever see any of that.
But this is saying.
Not really.
If you have wood windows today, you could administratively put in vinyl clad. Right?
if you have, yes. Yes.
Just on storms.
Well, on storms and windows.
Oh, window answer.
And the issue with that becomes is that, here was the whole reasoning behind it. when you had vinyl windows weren't of the same architectural value, didn't have the same strength. So in other words, where you have 2 1/4 rails and 2 1/4 stiles on a house, what would happen is that you would end up with 4 inches or 3.5 inches, which would dramatically change the look of the window, so you would have less glazing area. And you may say, well, it's only 3/4 of an inch, but it's 3/4 of an inch here, it's 3/4 of an inch here, and 3/4 of an inch here and here. So it does change it. Your mutton bars were heavier as well, so you had significantly less glazing area. So that's why you didn't want to do that. But clad windows are actually a wood window. They're coated, which you could argue coating them, or cladding them, however you want to word it, is the same as painting them. It's a covering for that window. But yet, the windows being wood were strong enough to where you could keep the same 2 1/4 rails and stiles. So that was how that came about.
You know, the topic of glazing area
Yeah.
is the single most common issue that has come up, I should say, since I've been on the commission.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if we shouldn't actually include the expression glazing area, just to give you one other key. I mean, that may be what you mean by scale.
Well, that's what we use: pattern, size, material, and scale. But we can also add on to that, or architecturally or historically appropriate.
You could do that too.
The
That might accomplish the same thing.
Okay. So I'll add that to those. Okay. Hot tubs, pools were not visible from the street, providing no trees, which I wanted to take out of there, are disturbed. Trees is kind of an interesting topic for a historic district. Trees are not forever. They grow
What?
old, they die, they have to be removed. Some of them even threaten our historical resources and, as you've seen through the storms this summer, houses in general. So the thought process here is that if you can do this from the backyard, you can't see it from the front, why would it make a difference? The difference is that instead of having them come for hot tubs, pools, were not visible from the street, which I already can do, okay? Now, because I gotta move a tree to put those things that I already can do in, they have to come here for a tree that's in the backyard. So if you're okay with me taking that language out, that's one that I would.
They can chop down the tree if they're not putting it on a hot tub, right, without any.
If it's dangerous, because right now I can do it if it's dead, diseased, or dying. Right now, from a liability standpoint, the city's not gonna go in and say, you can't cut down that tree. Well, the tree's hollow and it's dropping, 2-foot limbs on my house.
So I have a perfectly healthy tree in my backyard.
Yes,
Is there anything preventing me from just taking it down?
no. It's your tree,
So yeah, I mean, I guess I would just take it down and then ask for it.
right. Well, but the thing would be is that where you want to, if they want to do something like that, it's just because they want to. But that's not where we're at with this right here. So we'll get to trees down a little bit. But for hot tubs, pools, I would like to be able to have them remove a tree to put in their hot tub, to put in their pool. If they want to use their backyard. Basically, when we were having this from the get-go, we were looking at streetscape. And you can't see this.
Makes sense.
I'm comfortable with getting rid of it, and you're gonna get our disturbed along with providing no trees, right?
That is correct.
Yes, I'm comfortable.
Okay.
Everybody else is.
Ornamental iron replacement with the same pattern, size, material, and scale as substantiated if possible. Work for you guys with that? Because there's a lot, and I'll give you one. For example, there's a house on Jules Street where they had some ornamental iron that they wanted to put back. Well, you couldn't prove that it was there, but it's on the rest of the house, so it made sense, and they were willing to have it made the same way. Okay. I don't necessarily see the issue there, but if you want to include that as substantiated.
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Then replacement of light fixtures provided they're not character defining features of the resource, excluding fire hazard and broken fixtures. There's one other thing that I want to add to this. So you should think about cameras and security. that would be one of the things that you want to think about. People put up cameras, people put up security measures, people put up ADT, everybody's got Ring doorbells and Ring this and that. I've got it at my house. I can tell you when a flea moves at 2:00 in the morning across my garage when it sends off an alarm. So that, you may want to exempt security lighting or security, or to the extent possible, like for example, Ring on some houses, a white doorbell on a white house is great, never see it. Ring doorbell black on a white house, you see. White on a black house, you see. So as long as it, to the extent that it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? To the extent that it can be consistent with the coloring and not be a glaring thing. Like if you put up a white floodlight for a spotlight or something like that, or an alarm or something like that, and it's white on the white trim of the house, you're not gonna see that. If it's white in the middle of the brick, of the red brick on a house, you're gonna see that, so there may be some questions for that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you could, I think if we're going to address that, I think probably the expression we'd want to use is visually unobtrusive. It might be easier to,
Visually compatible,
visually compatible, except that's kind of, it implies something else. I don't have to think about it.
it's somewhat subjective.
Yeah, that's
And I think,
very subjective.
I don't want to kind
So-
of walk around and look and see what people actually have
I'd
been
be
doing.
shocked if anybody's coming to ask if they can put in a Ring doorbell or a Ring.
You know, they don't.
Right?
And that's the thing, they don't. And not that they would have to for a Ring doorbell, but if somebody's got this whole big camera apparatus with a dual spotlight and a camera hanging from it on the side, maybe you want to look at it. Why don't?
This is replacement, though, that's the problem I'm having. So if we're deciding replacement, that's a different than adding new, right?
Well, do you want to address that with that, or do you just want new? Because I will tell you that it would be difficult for us not to allow somebody to have a security system on their house.
Okay. Are we creating a problem that doesn't exist yet? Or are we trying to address a problem?
We're
that doesn't
trying to
exist yet?
address problems that don't exist because administrative approvals, the broader these are, the less chance that they're gonna have to wait or they're gonna come in. So to answer your question, yeah, Mike, we absolutely are.
Yeah, okay.
But that's one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure we do that so that if that comes in, that I don't have to send them because they want to put a white camera instead of a black.
Maybe the thing to do would be just to add a separate line.
We can do that.
Leave this one the way it is, because it is replacement, and then,
All right, let me add a separate line, I'll come back with that for cameras and security.
Yeah, so I guess in the event somebody does come and ask, they have some kind of parameters on
Okay.
what to follow.
Excavations for water or sewer line replacement, including any and all below grade approvals. So any and all below grade approvals, we can take and we can add in there, excavation for water sewer lines or below grade construction.
I don't understand why this is even on here. How can we be approving something that we don't see that's underground? And plus, it's a right of safety and it's health and
Absolutely.
safety and maintenance. I don't even think this should be on here because we should have nothing to say. If, my sewer line's broke, I gotta get it
You're gonna
fixed.
fix it.
What the heck, what are we approving?
You
Something
can't
that I
move
don't
the
even
house.
see? What, am I gonna get mad that we didn't put clay tile back? I mean, that's ridiculous. We would never put clay tile.
No, you can't even get it, so.
I don't even understand why this is on here,
Do you
because
wanna
we have
de-
no purveyance over this
Do
issue
you want
at
to
all.
delete it, or do you want to keep it because of subgrade structures? And the whole reason that I want to add the subgrade structures, if you keep it at all, or you could just say, any and all subgrade structures is administratively
Yeah, I don't understand. We're supposed to be looking at the historic if my foundation is crumbling, if it probably because it's historic, I'm gonna fix it. Why am I,
Yeah,
it's a health and safety, it's a stability,
yep.
it's a.
what do you have in
Maintenance
mind?
The reason I'm talking about subgrade structures, because remember, some of you will remember, some of you will not, that we had a situation where window wells came in.
That's what I was wondering,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's
Putting in
why.
an egress window is what.
That's
remember.
exactly it, and we've had that. So, while it's just a little bit above grade, it's 90% below grade, and I would like to not have to send that here.
And then if that's what the intent is, does anybody else have an issue with egress?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could just eliminate though the water and sewer line replacement, but put in subgrade structures and just use that as a catch-all.
That works for me if that works for you. So when I bring it back, that's what it's gonna say.
Fine.
If
Is that-
anybody has that old prohibitionary vault buried in their front yard, are we gonna?
Let me know what's in it. Okay, decks and rear yard patios, obviously, I'd like to be able to keep that, that shouldn't be an issue. Air conditioners and generators.
There is a wording thing here. Maybe you need rear yard decks and patios.
Yes.
Okay, so let's do the
Decks
semantic,
can't be in
we'll
the
put
front
rear
yard.
yard decks and patios.
Yeah.
We'll just move the words around. Okay, air conditioners and generators in the side yard with the neighbor's approval. The only reason I have with the neighbor's approval in there is because that's what's required now. So this would be one of those things where I can either have them put it on their patios or historically appropriate features in the backyard and take away, but there's also a code here. You can't put that within 5 feet of a window or door. So if you have a generator, so you can't do it. So the problem is, where do you put it? Well, I can't let them do that, and all of a sudden I have somebody that can't have a generator.
I thought, I remember a couple of years ago on the planning commission, we were doing away with the approval for that because if I approve a side yard and then I sell the house, the next person hates it.
Well,
I
that's,
thought we were
but
doing
it's
away with that.
established, it's already established at that point. The issue, and to answer your question, we're still working on that, but right now, we're at the point where you don't have to have your neighbor's signatures for fences. The problem is that you're asking your neighbor to be a de facto zoning board of appeals and grant what you can't have by the code. And that's not where we're at with this. So we're slowly trying to change that and make that a by right situation rather than that. But that takes some time, and then once we do that, that hearing has to be held at the planning commission level, and then it has to go to the city commission. And the air conditioners and generators is not there yet, but fences are.
Oh, yeah, I thought for some reason we changed it to, they had to be in the rear of the house, no matter what, regardless.
That's where they are,
Oh, that's where they are now.
right, but they
Okay.
can be put in the side yard with the neighbor's permission.
Got it. Okay.
So what we're looking to do and what may happen down the road, I can tell you that this will go to the planning commission like that, the neighbor signatures, will that have to be done, but we're looking at how to regulate that. So perhaps it may be that air conditioners and generators by right can be put in the side yard, provided it's to past 50% of the rear of the house. You know what I mean? Like it's in the back half of the side of the house.
Okay.
It's screened, we could do that. So for that, I would like to be able to leave that as it is right now because the ordinance hasn't changed, but I'd like to reserve the right to revisit you with you when that comes up and it comes before the city commission. And that's not likely to happen this year, it's likely first part of next year. Tree removal when dead, diseased, or dying of private trees. We do that all the time with city trees, and the reason we do it with city trees is because clearly there's a liability issue. If we know the tree's bad, we take it out. It protects the people, it protects the public, it protects the host, it protects the historic resources too, because some of these trees are monsters in the right of way.
But back to my earlier point, if I
Yeah.
don't have to ask to take a tree off my property, what's the point of having this in here?
Because you don't have to ask to take a tree off your property in the historic, in where you live on Hart, you don't have to. If you're in the historic district, you do. So that's
Oh,
why we're
okay.
changing that.
Got it, I misunderstood.
Okay.
When I asked that question initially, I thought that applied to
Yeah.
the historic. So if I live in the historic district, I can't take a tree out without.
Unless it's dead, diseased, or dying.
So could it, if I substantiated that the tree was not that big?
If
and
you
the
show
house
me
was
an
built-
arborist,
Because I can tell you that it wasn't. So
Right.
I find this one comical, but that's me.
but
Even
here's the
in the
thing,
rear
like for historic, pardon me?
Even if it's in the rear of the house?
Well, right now, but we're taking care of that when I was asking about the patios and, you know, things like that to the rear of the house. And basically, if it's on your property, you should be able to do it. What's gonna happen when the tree dies? Your views and vistas are gonna change anyway. Most of the trees that are on these houses, except for that, and the bigger trees that are on the houses, are 80 years old. What's the average life expectancy of a silver maple? We're lucky if we get that here. You know, they fall over. So that's kind of where we were at with the trees. So if you're okay with that, I'd like to just keep that or remove it altogether.
I've got a lot of baggage, because I remember there was a tree ordinance and all
Yep.
this stuff, so.
Yep.
I find this one to be really hard, because we've seen pictures of Yosemite when it was historic versus now, and the trees have changed, and trees are ever changing, landscapes are
Yep.
ever changing, so I find it hard to kind of put your finger on when does it be, quote unquote, become historic. And like it or not, I know people who want sun in the yard and they cut them down, so this is one of those ones that's just confounding to me, so I'm gonna let everybody else speak, because I don't know.
It seems to me if you can't take a healthy tree out, if you're in the historic district, we should certainly allow people to take them out if they're
Disease, right?
diseased or
So I'm
dying.
fine
Or
with it.
yeah.
Yeah, well, we do
We're not
now.
changing
This
the,
is right here, tree removal when dead, deceased, or dying is allowed.
Yeah, so
I think
I
the
guess keep
question is if we want to expand it and just do, you can just take the trees out, even if it's healthy.
we can't change the
can't
standards
change
or
the
the way that what the historic district allows. What we can allow is Hank to make certain administrative approvals. We can't change what people can or can't do to these trees right now. But they are allowed to remove them for the following reasons listed here. Hank, I never had anybody ever come before this commission and ask to remove a dead or dying tree. It's always proactively done.
Well, it's done
with-
because we're allowed to do that now.
So we're not changing anything that's currently,
You don't have to change anything, because if the tree is dead, diseased, or dying, if it's a healthy tree and they want to remove it, then they would have to come to the board, unless
or they
now,
do it
as
on
of
a
what we
Saturday or
talked about,
Sunday.
there's not a whole lot you can do about that. You know, because they're not going to run right out and tell them to stop, because once the tree's cut, it's cut, you know, at that point. But that's what it is. We can do that. I can play with that, see if there's something else that you might like or some other
I think it's
verbiage.
fine the way it is.
Yeah, why the solution out like?
Search of a problem. So we could do that. You want to just leave that for right now?
Yeah, let's just leave it.
Okay. Okay, and then, we added porches of the same size and material unless replacing to match substantially or substantiated original. We already talked about that, but that was on here. We gave that a separate line item, so we're okay with that.
So the top one, under number 4, addresses uncovered porches. So in this case, we're talking about covered porches, correct?
Right, or we can combine the two.
Maybe the thing to do is combine it and just say replacement of covered or uncovered porches.
Now, here's what I would tell you. If it's replacement, I would have no problem with it. If it's a newly covered porch, it's gonna alter the front, the streetscape of that, I would bring that to you.
Right.
Yeah,
That has-
so,
That doesn't prevent, that statement doesn't prevent you from doing
Right.
it.
yeah,
That's how that would go.
so maybe in number 4, you can just amend it to say replacement of covered or uncovered porches. And then you cover both. I mean,
Seems like it covers both.
I agree with that.
yeah.
Okay,
And then if you're changing an uncovered porch and making it covered, that defaults to what we normally do, business as usual, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Fair?
so, and then to the next one, landscape provided does not obscure that, or that was a word that wasn't supposed to be there. That it doesn't obscure the historic structure, so meaning if I can come in and put a big rhododendron in the middle of the front lawn, and you can still see the historic structure, we're gonna be fine with that.
Do we really govern landscape installations?
I would prefer,
I
I would
can't
prefer
believe we do.
not to,
But it's in our ordinances?
but it's part of the things that we look at. There is landscape, we have it as part of our, as part of our approvals, our guidelines.
I just don't like that one at all, but that's just me, so I can't
Do we
imagine.
really have some purview over landscaping?
Yes, you
You're
do.
not gonna change walls or put in any type of permanent structures or anything?
You do by virtue of the standards that were established in 2004 when the district was formed. You can deviate from those if you give me administrative approval to do so. I can't do it without administrative approval. What I can do is I can talk to City Attorney Rosati and see if we might want to revisit some of these standards and readopt those that were done in 2004.
I think,
Seems
I
like
think
this
it's,
fixes the problem, if you just say it doesn't, as long as it doesn't obscure, that way if somebody comes to you with something insane, you can always kick it.
Right, if somebody says, look, I want to put in a 40-foot, wide rhododendron in the front yard and it's 28 feet high, no, you can't do
I'm
that.
just gonna plant this 1.5-inch oak tree, caliper oak tree, and then in 20 years, it's gonna obscure the structure, but now it doesn't.
Right,
it's gonna take more than 20 years, but I get your point.
right, but that's the thing.
Well, but there is an ambiguity here, which is that if I remember the guidelines from the Department of Interior, it's not just greenery that we're talking about with landscape, and particularly in Huntington Woods. I mean, there's a
Correct.
lot of hardscaping that's being done that could also obscure a structure. But anyway, I think just leaving it the way it is fine.
Okay, the other way that you can do that is softscape.
So, but let's talk about the hardscape, Carmen, just because you can't put a fence in the front yard.
You can't do that anyway.
You can't put a screen wall. You can't, I mean, you're
Correct.
not gonna build a 20-foot retaining wall that's not retaining anything, because then it's gonna be a screen wall. So what type of hardscape are you thinking that can actually obscure the house? That's not gonna need a foundation and.
There,
require a whole
what
bunch of
if they
other-
put like brick,
Stonehenge.
Stone. That's
brick
art.
pilasters
art.
with lights on them,
But don't
something
you
like
need,
that.
I mean, there's gotta be other codes that govern that, right? There's
So-
gotta be foundations and
A
stuff like
landscape
that,
would
right?
cover it all.
Right, but the landscape, including hardscape or softscape, would cover it all.
Okay, I just say leave it
Okay.
as it is, yeah.
All right, electric charging stations,
You probably mean, I'm assuming you mean automobile.
yes.
Yeah, maybe we should add the word automobile, just to be a little bit more.
People in on it, on the front
Hank,
of the
I wanna
house.
go back to this landscape for just a moment, because I'm thinking of something. There's a house, right in the corner of, where I think Dundee and Henry meet, it's at one of those peninsular type
Yep.
lots. And the owner, over a series of weekends, planted like a hedge or something that went around the entire property, probably a total of 250 feet of hedges. How he did it, I don't know. My back would be done after the first 10 feet. But is that something that he can't just do on his own if he wants to do it? Does he gotta come for?
I'd have to take a look at it. I know the property that you're talking about, and to be honest with you, I haven't been over there and looked at that in a long time. They had a building permit.
I mean, I'm not out to try and bust the guy, I'm just trying to figure.
No,
Could
but what
somebody
I'm
do
saying
this?
is
You
there
can't do this.
is an ordinance, there's ordinance, fences, walls, and hedges is an ordinance in our zoning ordinance. So they can't keep doing, you can't do that kind of stuff. That may be out of compliance and not have been able to have
It's
been
not
done.
a big hedge, it only sits up maybe a foot or something.
Well, now.
Yeah.
Right,
It'll
but
grow.
ultimately, that'll be, if that's a
Well, it's been
4-foot
in-
hedge that goes around the property,
The big addition.
that would be a
That's the shore
problem.
house.
I don't know, I know that, it's across the street from my house.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah,
that.
kind of across the street from your house, yeah.
I
Yeah,
find that box.
But I'm
with
just
lots of
wondering,
fences
is that
and
the sort of thing
sidewalk next to
that one would come to you with?
that would
Should
be,
they have come
and I would
with that?
say no, but I would say no based on the zoning ordinance, not so much based on this.
Okay. How are they allowed to do that if?
Because nobody saw them.
I mean, it's right out in the front for,
But nobody drives around looking for that. That's the issue. So if he did it on a weekend and you're not over there all the time, nobody would see it. If nobody called or nobody complained, we wouldn't even know it. That's why people, in Huntington Woods, over the course of the years, people put additions on their house a weekend at a time and you never see it.
I know who that is.
So,
It might still be going on.
Oh,
So-
thought we fixed that already.
so,
He's next to Jules too. Everybody's next to
Jules
Jules.
is the center of all that
nefarious activity.
We need to get him a new pair of eyeglasses
Yes,
so you can
Okay, so-
spy.
I'm busy spotting trash cans.
And just let you know, you got a bunch of political signs in the front.
I'm
right
aware of
Right
that.
across from your house.
Across the street.
And you are the king of enforcing ordinances,
I-
like trash
okay.
cans and everything.
let's
Remember,
go,
I'm
let's
sure
go
you are.
to, let's go to electric
Are they gonna be
charging
gone
station.
tomorrow?
So do they really get
Maybe.
mounted on the
Or
front
do
of
I have to
somebody's
remove
house?
I'm sorry, what are we doing now? Are we still doing an electric charging station?
Yeah, we are. But
Thank you.
do they really get mounted on the front of somebody's house?
No, but they get mounted on the side, and that's a porter view that you could see it from. So if you want to regulate where those can be in historic houses, they can be in the garage, they can be in the backyard, or they can be on the side of the house, because we do let them put them on the side of the house, provided the electrical code does allow for it. That's up to you.
Well, you can
Charging-
say on the side, but use language like you did for the, talking about the Ring camera, say to the, to the extent it can be made visually compatible.
Or screened, or, Okay, we can do something with that.
I mean, right now, they're pretty big, my son-in-law.
They're
just put one in his
pre-manufactured.
Right.
Garage,
Custom
and they're
color.
really pretty big, but I can imagine in a few years, they're not gonna be very big, they're probably gonna be the size of a Ring camera.
Well, they're not.
right, well,
Probably.
or the charging station would be really in the basement, and your hose would come from an adapter out, something like that.
See it.
We'll see. All right, so I can do something with that with screening. Okay, 19, garage replacement, the same location, same size of materials, or go back to original as substantiated. Tree falls on a garage.
Done.
Sorry, I got a question about that.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a complete tangent, but it makes me nuts that these dual bay garages that people can't use have to be rebuilt the same. They're these old garages where there's two.
They have a
single bays
post in the middle.
And a
resemble
modern,
that.
no modern car will fit in there.
I
Right.
resemble that. Yeah, this is good, keep talking.
Right, Chris is gonna change his header, and actually, here's some of the parts. Some of those garages, like you're talking about, already have a header that goes across, and the post comes down to.
Mine, I'm not that fortunate.
Okay, but having said that, you can make it look a lot different. You can still use a carriage door, you can still use something like that. If you want to make the verbiage where garage doors can be altered, I would have to take a look, because there is a standard, a guideline, which we have, which I'll bring back the guidelines with this now that we have a basis for discussion on this. I'll bring the guidelines back, and perhaps we have to amend the guidelines, because it would say carriage doors is specifically mentioned in that. So why don't I
I'd like to
do
see
that?
changed to let people.
Well, let me
park in their
bring that
garage.
back, because here's the thing, realistically, the only cars that would fit in there was like an old Yugo, or, you couldn't fit a Pacer because it was too wide, so what were they fitting there? Certainly not any pickup trucks, certainly not anything of substance, and most of today's SUVs would fit in there. So what does it become? The cars are in the driveway, and the garage is where they put all their stuff.
And they can't fit their garbage cans in there?
They-
and Juice
right.
gets all over them.
Well, because you can't fit your garbage can and still fit in the slot where the door is.
Right.
So, all right, I'll bring in the guideline for that too, because it may be time to amend some of these guidelines to be consistent with this. But this is a good idea, because then I get the way to know what it is. So the replacement, same location, same size. If there's a size difference, do you want to see it? Because it goes to kind of what Mike was saying. If it's a 20 by 20 garage, that's all great. You can fit two small cars in there, but you can't fit anything else. Most garages that we see coming in here are 22 or 24 across the front, 20 to 24 deep.
Somebody builds a replacement garage that meets the building code and meets the other general standards of lot coverage and all that kind of stuff, and looks the same as the original garage. I certainly don't see why we would have a problem with
You
that.
could say similar materials, because a lot of the times, it's just like with the house. If you're not comfortable with saying the same materials, because sometimes you can't get the same materials, and other times you want to differentiate the old from the new. You want me to put something together and bring that back for you to take a look at?
Yeah, I think garages are
They should be a little different animal.
a lot of money
sunk into those.
Oh, we have garages in the city right now that have been put up in the last 5 years that are like $80,000-$100,000 garages. So let me take a look at that for you, if that's okay, and then we'll come back with that.
You know what you could do, Hank, is to leave 19 as it is, and then add a separate one for, changes to garages, to see about that. Because the wording that you have here gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of somebody just,
That's an emergency replacement, is
Yeah.
really what this is.
okay,
Falls
I'm
under.
inclined to say, let's leave that as it is, and then
And
we can,
add something else?
then we can have maybe a separate line
Okay.
to give you
Deals
some
with-
flexibility if somebody wants
A
to. or-
replacement of a garage with one that's larger. You're talking about that,
Yeah.
just, I want to do an improvement to my house. not a
Exactly.
Replacement. If you could,
Exactly.
that could be two separate ones. So the emergency is the emergency.
Right, well,
But does the
right,
emergency
because
allow
here's the-
people to then expand? I guess is
Because
what
here's
I'm
the thing, right? If I have a garage, something falls on it, my garage, like I have one of the car and a half garages that I just replaced, but I replaced it with a car and a half garage because my whole yard was built that way. So, but it's new. So, unfortunately, unfortunately, I had a tree fall on it, so the insurance company bought it for me. But the thing is that if I had it to do and I was just gonna do it and say it was damaged, I would say, you know what, I wanna make this a two-car garage. If I'm gonna rebuild this, why wouldn't I do it at this point in time?
Why when I do the improvements?
It makes sense. So let me see what kind of lines I can get. I'll talk that over with, actually, I'll talk that over with the people from the Michigan Historic Preservation Network and see if they have anything that they want to weigh in on that. And we can go from there. So getting down to the last couple of these, here's the porch rails that Mike was talking about, or the railings, or was it Chris? Porch rails are steps to meet code as replaced in kind. So that's basically gonna be what we talked about before. If it meets code, we wanna let them do it. I don't wanna be, or we, the city of Huntington Woods, don't wanna be in the position of having somebody not raise their thing and somebody falls off the porch because the rail's only 2 feet high instead of 36 inches.
So on this one, I think so addition of a porch rail or steps to meet code, or it's a replacement in kind, right? Those two separate things.
Right.
So if it's there and you're replacing it in kind, you're gonna let that go. So the porch rail steps, there's something about appropriateness still in this one, right?
Mhm.
We still want some judgment to prevent the vinyl, just because, we want to try to still shepherd a little bit of the aesthetics, right?
Well, it's gonna be, here's the thing, if somebody wants to put a vinyl rail on a porch in a historic district, they're coming before you.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's.
So there are no instances where you could administratively approve that, because.
There's no instances where I would,
Okay, all right.
is what I'm saying. It would have to be appropriate. If they were telling me that they were gonna put wrought iron on a 1928 Tudor Revival, I wouldn't have a problem. If they're telling me they're gonna put white vinyl, PVC or whatever on the front porch, that's coming to you, because that's not appropriate. It's not
You should be
architecturally
doing a
appropriate.
horizontal stainless steel cable rail, because then it differentiates it from the new.
Well, so,
But, okay,
But that's.
but that's a discussion that you're gonna have. That's not gonna be administrative.
so maybe to be a little bit clearer with number 20, you could say replacement of porch rails and steps to meet code. In other words, put the word replacement up at the beginning, and then that gives you the flexibility to.
Well, but then it should say, or new as architecturally appropriate.
I just wanted, like, my instance, I just wanted to put, like, the real simple, something that people could get up the front, into my house, right? My
Yeah,
aging
absolutely.
In-laws and
Yeah.
father. So, are you saying that I could administratively approve that, or I would have to come to this?
I could administratively approve that, provided that it's a material that's compatible architecturally with your house. So if you're telling me you're gonna put a wrought iron handrail on there, on your house in particular, I'm gonna tell you that that's architecturally appropriate. If you're gonna tell me that you wanna put a PVC, white vinyl PVC on there, I'm gonna tell you that's not architecturally appropriate. If you wanna go to the HDC, you can, or you can put a wrought iron one, and I'll approve that administratively now.
Did that answer the scenarios that cover what you're trying to cover? Because I'm still confused as to when
Well,
I
the
do or don't have to come.
Well, the wording of this is confusing because it says porch rails and steps to meet code as replaced in kind. So the implication and the wording of that is there's already a rail.
There is,
Or
because
steps.
that was that there, because we're not addressing new in this, and we should address new in it.
Because I bet you there's some porches that are too high for code now.
Yep.
And you're making, so I could come in, as long as you deem it appropriate, you're gonna let me do that? You have administrative approval if I feel like it's unsafe and I wanna do that.
If you have,
Depends on the material.
if you have the way that it is right now, if you want to put a rail on there and there hasn't been one, that would come here.
Right.
This would change that.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at. I
Yeah.
think we want to give him, give
This,
the city some administrative approval. We're just trying to figure out what it means, right? The wording
Right.
isn't, for some reason, I'm confused by the wording too.
Okay,
so let's.
so I
change
think that probably the wording change might be something like porch rails. What you could do is say new or replacement porch rail steps to meet code,
that. Okay,
and just leave it at that, and leave out the in kind. Or you could use the as appropriate.
well, I would add the as appropriate.
Okay, that's fine.
Architecturally or historically appropriate.
That's fine, then I think
Because
that,
that gives me the thing, because I mean, realistically, for me, when I comes in on this, and having been one of the original members on the Historic District Commission, my take on this would be is that if it's not historically appropriate, then what are we doing here? So if you want to have that, and it's wrought iron and it fits with that, I would have no problem with that. Conversely, you wouldn't want to have a modern structure where you're limited to only having wrought iron when other materials are clearly appropriate with that. A house built in 1952 in the historic district comes to mind with that. And, you know, because the house is wood, it's panels, it's colored panels, and it's glass, would wrought iron, twisted, you know, ballast, that wouldn't match with that. That wouldn't be appropriate. So another type of rail might be. So that's the flexibility that we would want with that. You know which house I'm talking about, so, okay.
sounds good.
All right. And then the last that we had was kind of like a catch-all, and I didn't know if you wanted to do this or not. Any changes that go back to original with documentation?
We need to cover ourselves just so that, you know, what if they want to go back to something original that now does not meet code?
If it doesn't meet code, we can't issue a permit for it. It won't pass an inspection.
Okay, we don't need to.
That's where
So
the
this
building
would cover
department
the-
falls
Who was
in.
talking about the window replacement? You were, right? So somebody's got a house with vinyl, but they want to go back to what was substantiated before. This would allow them to do that administratively,
Right, they
correct?
can do
Yes.
that, that's not the problem, the problem was
Oh,
somebody
the
with the vinyl
vinyl who
windows.
wants to do the
wants
vinyl
to
again.
Up it again with another 20 years of ugly vinyl windows.
I don't know, I don't know if you can't stop
I
that,
can't,
can you?
because I can't stop that because it's already there. If they're replacing it,
But
it's
they're
already
replacing it.
established.
But
If
they're
I
in a
have a
historic
driveway and I
district,
take
right.
it out, a circular driveway, you're not gonna allow me to put another circular driveway in. If I
In the
remove it,
historic district, we would. Because that's the historic routing materials. That's it. Having said that, there are houses in the historic district, one of which members of this committee are very familiar with, that have half-round, they have semicircular driveways. But they've always had semicircular driveways.
His initials are JA, in case you're wondering who it is.
No, there's another
Oh,
one
there's
on
a
the board
commissioner.
and commission too.
Whose name shall be
So,
unannounced.
no, there's nothing wrong with that. Those were designed to be that way. So in saying that, you should be able to have it. Now, here's the thing. That's the impetus for the historic tax credits, because when you have a project that you're doing like that, and windows right now are tens of thousands of dollars, that may trigger that, and then that tax saving may be the cost that may be the thing that drives putting in the more compatible windows with that. I will tell you that we had a person that collected on historic tax credits that originally wanted to put EIFS on their house. They didn't do that, they put stucco because the historic tax credits, they qualified for it, so the money that they got paid for the difference in what it would cost, so it didn't cost them any more to actually be the correct appropriate historic material.
So I'm gonna backpedal. I think I was wrong when I stated what I stated with your case.
What's that, I'm sorry?
The vinyl window, so I'm in a house, I willingly bought a house in the historic district, and I go to replace the windows. I don't get carte blanche just because there was a different window in there, right? I just can't say that I can replace it with that if it's not historically appropriate, right?
As it,
Because I willingly bought the house in the historic district, I have to follow the guidelines, right?
At that point, if you wanted to do that with that, we could have it where you leave it and it comes back here to you, because I can only approve now windows that are the same size and, style and stuff like that. Wall side windows, and I don't want to specifically say wall side windows, but wall side has become the standard for what you call vinyl windows, because they do more of them than anybody. That those rails and styles are not the same size as the historically accurate wood windows, whether it's clad or not.
I think that, I think the answer to your question is that if you go through the list of questions in terms of that you have to address when somebody wants to make a change like that, there's nothing in there that would prevent you from replacing your vinyl windows with vinyl windows, because you're always, the whole thrust of all of the questions you have to answer are you destroying something that's historically significant?
And that's standards 9 and 10.
Because those were historic to begin with.
There's nothing there to preserve, so there's nothing, do you see what I mean? It's all about preservation, it's not about
I
restoration.
think maybe there should be a catch-all thing in here that you don't have, if there's anything you're uncomfortable with for some reason, that you don't have to issue an administrative.
We don't, we send it
Don't.
here.
It's already in
Already
there.
has that.
It's
It's in the
already in
preamble.
there, yeah, we
It's in the
don't.
preamble.
If there's something
So if
that's,
somebody wants to go from vinyl to vinyl, you could say, I'm just not comfortable with this, and then
that is correct,
send it back.
Yeah.
And let the chips fall where they may at this level.
right.
And I think that that's probably a good
Or
way
I
to
could
handle
say
it.
no, and they could come to the historic district anyway, because that's what they want to do.
I think that's the best way to handle it.
Your appeal of a decision would be here. So if they don't like anything that happens with the administrative approvals, they're welcome to go to the HDC and take their chances with the full board. And that's the way it should be.
Well, I'm just hoping that if a matter like that comes before you, and I know how you feel about the historic district, that you would hopefully feel a little uncomfortable perpetuating something that really needs to be deliberated.
It's the same as the rails thing to me. But the thing is that if they were coming for vinyl, again, to go what Jeff says, it's not historic material and it hasn't acquired historic value in its own right. However, those vinyl windows aren't 50 years old. However, that would end up back here. That's not going to end up with something where I'm going to switch vinyl for vinyl administratively. I would certainly switch vinyl for a wood-clad window administratively, or a vinyl-clad wood window, or an aluminum-clad wood window, because that's the same rails and styles, same sizes, same glazing area, and same pattern. If it had mutton bars, it's got to have mutton bars. If it didn't have mutton bars, it doesn't need mutton bars. But those things would all factor into the decision administratively, just the same way as it would as if it came here.
Regarding 21, I think the only thing I would change is, instead of saying any, I would say other.
Other changes, I can do that. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do with this. I'm gonna come back with some changes. We're definitely gonna have an October meeting, because we should continue this and not wait for the next meeting, which might be next year, and we should finish this up. So there definitely will be an October meeting. So provided that it doesn't, and I always check around this time of year to see what holidays it may fall on or whatever, but we'll check that out, and then we'll be back to you. So this will come back to you for October.
I do have one comment. This was brought forth by an applicant not too long ago, in the recent past, and she felt that it was onerous, overly onerous, to require a resident to come before this commission and pay the application fee, which is it $300, Hank? or-
It is.
Pay $300 for something that would not cost anybody else in the city that didn't live in the historic district. Like if you wanted to change your windows, and somebody else could just get permitted for those without paying a fee, why should somebody that wants to change their windows in the historic district be required to pay additional fees? And this was, Hank suggested, it sat really in the hands of the city commission, not in the hands of us, and I agree with that. But I think that it is overly onerous for 180 residents to have to pay additional fees for things that the other 2,300 or households within the city do not have to pay to do the same exact thing to their house.
That's something that we could look at, but the issue becomes then is that the city has to cover their costs. So, I mean, the cost on this is you have mailing costs, you have preparation time, you have time, so there is cost in a meeting no matter what.
Maybe it should be
what
built
is.
into the permitting fees, but why should somebody have to pay more money to get permission from the city to do something that an identical other person that lives in a different area would not have to pay?
Because
the
it
same fee?
requires more effort on the part of the city, like Hank just said, yeah.
You
Being
I
this,
understand
you have to
that.
have staff, it requires.
Okay, Jules, when I throw out my garbage and I have 1 can of garbage every week, and the guy across the street from me has 10 cans of garbage, it
No.
requires more effort, but the garbage disposal costs are
Yeah.
borne by everybody equally.
Well, that just means we'd have to, you're talking about raising all the permit fees to.
That's
give-
exactly right. It's unfair to charge one set of residents the same, a different fee, and it's not $10 more, it's like maybe
No,
like
it's not
multiples more.
It's not a, unreasonable analysis. I'm just saying, and then you can hear other people say, well, my fee went up because you want to live in, I mean, we have the authority to do, I mean, the city has the authority to do it. You can say, well, I'm just gonna slightly increase the cost. All you have to do is figure out numerically how many historic applications there are a year, and then say how many non-historic applications there are a year, and probably the increase would be nominal when added and divided among all of them, distributed among all of them. It's not a bad, I was here for that meeting.
Just, so just to put something else out there too, you still have to, if you're doing changes to your house, you'll still go to site plan review.
Right, and those should not be, I'm just saying for
For
people that are
minor
doing.
changes like, this goes to the administrative approvals, right? So the more that you give here, the less that happens. The more administrative approvals there are, the less that there has to be meetings for,
Right.
and the less people have to pay. And you've just tonight indicated that you're willing to forego a lot of the stuff that would normally come to a meeting. So you've actually taken out tonight, or by the time the final draft of this is done, you've actually taken out a lot of those scenarios where that problem would exist for a fence, where somebody would have to pay $300 for a fence, or somebody would have to pay $300 for something else.
So it's gonna put it for more substantial
Projects,
modifications.
yes.
Typically, which
Yes.
I'm just saying things that other people would just
I-
have to go pull a permit for,
I totally get
but
it.
in their case, they have to come here to get the same exact,
And the administrative kind of does that, but it doesn't do it but we'd have to statistically look at this.
We'd
So-
also have to take a look at what, other, like Birmingham, other cities with historic.
A lot of the historic districts, I mean, you pay to go to historic district commissions.
But
and you should for things like
Big
additions and, changes that would requires site plan.
It would be the same $300 whether you spend it at the planning commission or here, or something like that.
So I think maybe though, Steve, that, I think it's a good point, but maybe we actually accomplished
We
that.
did cover a lot of them there.
Well, and maybe there's more to, but with the understanding that ordinances, anything like this, approvals, whatever you want to do, is a living, breathing document. As you find more cases, and this was brought up specifically, and I want to thank Ed for it, because Ed and I have had many conversations about this after the last meeting. And he brought up a bunch of ideas, some of which, because of logistics and because of the way the chapter, you know, the way the Public Act 169 is written and the way that our historic ordinance is written, don't necessarily work for us. But the ideas that he brought up and the concepts that he brought up were that, is there a way that we can save people a lot of the rigmarole and a lot of the things for that? So I did want to acknowledge that we appreciate that, Ed, because that's kind of what happened here as far as I'm concerned. So, if that's okay, then what I'll do is I'll bring this back to you. We'll see you at the meeting in October. And Mr. Chair, I have nothing else other than public participation for you.
So I'm seeing that there's nobody here for public participation. We don't have to worry about that, and then we're just looking for some people's favorite motion maybe, but
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
all in favor, aye.
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 Thank you all very much. I appreciate the
Really
time
good
that you
dialogue.
gave us
Thanks.
tonight.
Yeah.